today's episode of Discussing Donation, we're speaking with Dr. Blake Paxton, Professor of Communication at St. Xavier University in Chicago. Dr. Paxton is an expert in the fields of interpersonal, health, and family communication. He is also the author of the book At Home with Grief. Today, he'll be sharing some of his insights on how to start difficult conversations with loved ones, as well as some of his thoughts and perspectives on dealing with grief. Hi, Blake.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Paxton is my colleague at St. Xavier University, and he is an expert in interpersonal communication, family communication, health communication, and so he's really an ideal person to talk to us about how young people, especially teens, but anyone could start that sort of difficult conversation about something that can be considered taboo, like your decision to be an organ donor. So Dr. Paxton, if you could tell us a little bit about how you can start those kinds of conversations, what that's like.
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. It's
Absolutely.
a really great honor, and I fully support organ donation. I'm an organ donor. So, if you have the opportunity to talk to your family about that decision, I think that's a great idea. I fully support that. There are so many lives that could be saved if you choose to be a donor.
Absolutely.
So I think that, it's difficult for people to have conversations around organ donation or any difficult topic, really, for a number of reasons. You may grow up in a family where, things are more private, or you might grow up in a family where, not a lot of things are off the table, right? It really just depends on sort of your upbringing. There's also some cultural influences that might impact someone's comfort with talking about difficult things. I know in some cultures, there's this fear that if you talk about illness or you talk about death, that somehow maybe you will cause illness or death. I also think about gender, right? I know we've progressed a lot with gender equality, but I think a lot of men are still socialized to not be emotionally expressive. And so if you're talking about difficult things, there's sort of this anxiety about, I may have to be emotional, I may have to be sensitive, I may have to show a part of myself and be vulnerable. And as you know, I am a huge fan of Dr. Brené Brown. She has written a lot about vulnerability. And so I think about when you have a conversation around donating your organ, that's a vulnerable place, right? And so culturally, I think vulnerability is still seen as a weakness sometimes instead of a strength. But I think that a lot of the really important decisions that we make in our lives, we have to put ourselves in a vulnerable position. We're not really taught growing up how to really sit in sort of uncomfortable or painful scenarios, either discomfort we feel or the discomfort of another. So like I said, I think, again, this sort of hesitance to have difficult conversations, it can be from family dynamics, it can be cultural dynamics, it can be gender dynamics, and then sort of overall sort of this cultural influence of not wanting to be vulnerable or put yourself out there.
So yeah, I could definitely see the cultural, the gender influences. In Illinois, for example, people as young as 16 years old can sign up to be an organ donor and make that decision when they get their driver's licenses. How does age play a factor in that and in having these kind of conversations? Is 16 too young to really be thinking about this? And is it better for the child to approach the parent, or perhaps the parent to approach the child before heading to the DMV?
So when I was thinking about this question, I actually reflected on my own experience when I learned about organ donation, and my mother approached me about it. And, you know, it wasn't something that we had to sit down at the table and have a really long discussion about. She was just very direct and matter of fact and positive, right? She said, I'm an organ donor, and these are the reasons why, right? I want to make sure that I'm able, if anything happens, to save lives. And that is your, you know, I would encourage you to do that, but it's ultimately your decision. And she acted, you know, she said, do you have any questions? I mean, again, this is, goodness, almost 17 years ago, but I do remember it being sort of a very nice, powerful moment. But she was just, yeah, I mean, she was very matter of fact, direct, open. And so I think it is, in my opinion, better for sort of the parent to talk to the child about it. And especially if they're an organ donor, to really emphasize those reasons why and why they're proud to be one, because I think that can be really encouraging. I also think it's important, whether the child approaches the parent or the parent approaches the child, that, again, we want to make it a hopeful, positive tone, right? I think we say this could really, you know, unfortunately, you know, we're all going to die one day. And what better gift could you give if you knew you could save someone, right? I think when we get into sort of like the specific what ifs, you know, the scenarios, that can cause sort of like unnecessary anxiety about making that decision. So really, kind of keeping it at a broader level, keeping it optimistic, keeping it hopeful, something to be proud of, matter of fact. I think that for me, at least when I was 16, that worked. And in terms of the age, I mean, I think 16 is perfectly fine to make that decision. I think that if we're allowing people to get behind the wheel of a car at the age of 16, then they should have the agency and the right to make that decision. And I think by 16, you know, you've either observed a family member maybe become ill, or you have experienced a death. So you know what those experiences are like and how you could possibly, you know, contribute in some way. I'm always under the impression too, like, and I don't have any children of my own, but I think that a lot of topics, whether it's organ donation or anything else, I think you can always start at a certain age, but it's about how you deliver the information, right? Like, we have to make it age appropriate. And we also have to make it like smart too, right? Because I know, like, when, you know, I've done some research on talking about death, right? And one of the things that is sort of, I don't know if it's touted out anymore, but, you know, telling a child when someone dies that they're going to sleep. Well, yeah, it might be age appropriate, but it's not very smart, right? Because it could scare the child. They could have this disappointment or false hope. So I think, you know, 16's fine. And I think in terms of parents talking to kids about difficult things, I think any age, it's always better to start earlier and just make sure it's age appropriate and make sure it's smart.
You brought up so many good points there. I'm going to probably have two follow-up questions, but we'll start with this one. So of course it's better for the parent to approach the kid, but if the parent doesn't approach the teen, how can the teen actually start that conversation?
So I think the first step with, you know, if you're a teenager and you're wanting to have a conversation about organ donation or anything that you think might cause some discomfort, it's really important to not catastrophize, right? I even have to do that for myself. Like, sometimes when I get ready to go into a conversation, we have this tendency to want to think the worst, right? Oh my gosh, what are they going to do? What are they going to say? So don't catastrophize, right? I know for me, a lot of difficult conversations I've had in my life, the outcome was a lot better than I expected. So I think it's good to kind of have potential scenarios of how the person might respond and kind of be prepared for any one of those scenarios. And how you are prepared for that is you do your research, right? You look at the statistics. You look at the process of organ donation, right? What that entails. What are your rights? What are your responsibilities? That way, you go into the room, you have all the information, you've thought about how your parent might respond in different ways, and you're prepared. And I know it might sound silly, but if you have an older sibling or you have a friend that you want to have the conversation with, that's totally fine too. But I think, going in, not catastrophizing, being educated, being prepared, and knowing that they're your parent and they love you and they have your best interests at heart. You may not always agree on everything, but they care for you, they love you, right? And so, and go in, thinking like, this is something really good. Like, this is something that can really help people. Yeah, so I also think, there's a lot of like kind of simple logistical things, like obviously not try to talk to your parent when, they're distracted, like they're watching something on TV, or they're going through a really stressful thing. Make sure the environment is kind of calm, quiet, familiar. It also might be good to look for what I call windows of opportunity, right? We're always seeing things on the news all the time, or things on Facebook, and it might be a cool way to bring up the topic. It's not so like artificial if you're watching something on the news and they're talking about this person that was saved from organ donation, and that's a great way for you to talk to your parent. Or you see a video like this and you're saying, I was just on Facebook and I saw this interview with a professor about why it's important to talk about organ donation. I'm going to be 16 next year, and what do you think? And let's talk about that. So look for those little windows of opportunity too.
I love those suggestions. Thank you so much for sharing those. And, there's going to be hopefully a lot of teens in our audience watching this, but there's also going to be a lot of people in our audience who are friends or family members of organ donors who, they've gone through the loss of a loved one. There's also people in our audience who may be organ recipients who can also experience some of that survivor's guilt. And I know you've got some experience in this area. In fact, you wrote a book entitled At Home with Grief. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, your knowledge, your research, and your book?
Thank you. So my book, At Home with Grief, Continuing Bonds with the Deceased, was published in 2018. And it's an adaptation of my dissertation that I did at the University of South Florida. And it's an individual case study on my own experience of losing my mother to a rare illness at the age of 18. And so I really felt like when it happened, I suppressed a lot of my emotion. I tried to kind of move on. And it wasn't until I got into grad school and I started learning about the dynamics of family communication and interpersonal communication and grief and loss that I really felt like I needed personally and academically to explore the dynamics of grief. And so in my research, I ran across a lot of bereavement scholarship on what they call continuing bonds with the dead. So the idea that even though someone dies and they are physically not present, there are ways that we can continue a relationship with that person through memorializing, through carrying on causes that they were passionate about, celebrating their birthday with friends even though they're not here physically, right? And then there's another vein of scholarship, same sort of idea, but they call it re-membering the deceased. And so the idea is that everyone is a member in our club of life. And when they die, they're still members, right? Like we still have their membership card, which is like the various artifacts that remind us of them. They're still a member of our club of life. And so when we do things to memorialize them, it's not just simply like recalling a story, right, about the person. That's just remembering without the hyphen. But if you hold an event to honor that person, for example, if they were an organ donor and you hold an event to inspire other people to donate the organs, that is re-membering, because it is in more active, conscious, meaningful way to continue that bond with the dead, and it inspires other people to continue their relationships. And so so I went back to my hometown and I explored, what does sort of re-membering look like in a community? Because there was all this research about sort of how does an individual continue a bond or remember, how does it happen in a family, but not a whole lot about like a whole town. So my mom was a hairdresser. She wasn't like a huge like politician or anything, but for years and years after she died, I mean, people would post, I thought about your mom today when this happened, not just family, but former clients. And so it really got me curious to thinking about, like, I'm surprised this hasn't been researched. Like, what does this look like at a sort of communal level? What does this look like when you do it? Like, you intentionally like continue that relationship every day. What does that feel like? What kind of stuff comes up for a person when someone's been gone for so long and then they come back and they sort of are like immersing themselves in this experience of grief? And so what I found was that, I felt more connected to people in my hometown. I came out as gay when I was 21, and I struggled a lot because I worried that people wouldn't accept me in my hometown. And so by doing this project, not only did I like reconnect with my mom, the memory of her, but I reconnected with all of these people that I thought wouldn't accept me or, would judge me. It was kind of in my head, I was perceiving things, I was assuming things about them that weren't necessarily true. And I found out things about my mom that I don't know if I would have found out had I not done the project. I mean, something as simple as like, how did your mom and dad meet? Like, what's their love story? Like, I had never asked that question. So the book is, I like to say that it's descriptive. It's a suggestion. I never tell anyone, like, this is how you should grieve or this is what you should do, but it's definitely helped me in my grieving process. And so when I think about organ donation, I mean, that's one additional way to re-member someone that's died, someone that you may have never met, but you are giving them this gift that you are, living life and embracing life, and because of their gift to you. And so, it may also help the families of that person that's passed away, like them knowing that their loved one saved a life, right? That can help strengthen that bond with the deceased. So, in terms of survivor's guilt, I haven't really, I haven't been in a situation where I've received an organ, or I don't really know anyone that has, but I've read things and I've read stories. And I think it's always important, of course, to feel what you feel, right? We don't want to suppress anything, and also to talk to someone, a professional, about what you're feeling. But if it's any consolation, I mean, by taking this person's gift, right, you are helping their family in the grieving process. You're helping them maybe feel more connected to the dead. You're helping them re-member. So that's a little bit about my book. And I tried to kind of think about how maybe it applies to either when you're trying to decide if you want to be an organ donor, or if you've received organ from a donor, and sort of your emotional process. Ultimately, it's helping you sort of leave a beautiful legacy.
Yeah, I have to say that at least in our experience with organ donation with Maddie, that so much of that resonates. And I think there's a lot to be said for the organ donation process being very healing and helpful in the long term to families and friends of the donor as well. And your work has definitely reflected a lot of my grieving process as well. And I've really appreciated that. And we're doing a lot of things to remember our Maddie as well. And a lot of that stems from your work. And I hope by sharing a little bit of your work that maybe some of our listeners today might find some inspiration there as well, and some help and some healing. Where can they find your book if they're interested in learning more?
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm really glad that you've been able to find something in my work, and hopefully other people can as well. My book can be found on Amazon.com. I actually, in preparing for this interview, I wanted to check it out and see what was going on, because it'd been a while since I'd looked at the page. So you may have to type the title and my name. It may not come up with just the title. So if you do that, and also don't freak out, because for some reason, I have no choice on this, but they decided to put the hardcover up first. But just know that there's a paperback version, and there's a Kindle version for a lot less of a cost. And so yeah, that Amazon, as far as I know, that's the only place that we can find it right now. But if you're having difficulty, getting a hold of it, reach out, and maybe I can figure out something to do for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can reach out to us too, and we'll make sure that you can get your hands on a copy of the book. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, Blake. This was, I think, really helpful to sort of get some ideas about having the conversation. That's really such a big push right now, is that a lot of people are checking the box to be an organ donor, but when their families don't know about their decision, that might cause more stress in a time that you don't need that kind of extra stress. And so hopefully by encouraging even these short, as you said, it doesn't have to be anything lengthy, but these short but really important conversations, hopefully we can make life a little bit easier for some people who unfortunately may have to be in the throes of something tragic. So thank you so much for that, and for your work with your book. It really is, I think, a really nice look at grieving from a different perspective.
Thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed my time today, and I hope that what I've been able to share with you will be helpful in some way. So thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Blake. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This message brought to you by the Maddog Strong Foundation. For more info, please go to our website at maddogstrong.org.